It did not begin with a speech or an emergency broadcast. It began with a single line on a radar screen moving silently across the Middle East. Iraq, Syria, the Eastern Mediterranean. For a few tense minutes, only a handful of operators inside military command centers understood what they were looking at. Because sometimes history doesn't start with headlines. It starts with a question on a radar monitor in the middle of the night. One terrifying question: where is that missile going? And when analysts looked closer at the trajectory, they realized something even more unsettling. The path was leading toward one of the most sensitive military locations on the planet. Before we go further, if you follow global conflicts, hidden military operations, and the real balance of power shaping the world right now, make sure you are subscribed to this channel and stay with me, because the story behind that radar track may reveal something far bigger than a single missile launch. In southern Turkey, not far from the Syrian border, sits a base that most people have never heard of, but which quietly holds enormous strategic importance: Incirlik Air Base. From the outside, it looks like a typical NATO installation. Runways, hardened shelters, radar systems, logistics depots, American and Turkish personnel working side by side. But beneath that ordinary appearance lies something that instantly changes the stakes if the base ever becomes a target. Incirlik is believed to store dozens of American B-61 nuclear gravity bombs inside underground vaults. Weapons that have remained there through the Cold War, regional wars, diplomatic crises, and even the attempted Turkish coup of 2016. For decades, NATO planners operated under one core assumption: Incirlik would remain secure, untouchable, too dangerous for any adversary to even consider targeting. Until suddenly, that assumption was put to the test. Early on March 4th, 2026, military tracking systems detected a ballistic missile launch from Iranian territory. The missile, believed to be a variant of the Fateh 110, began moving west, first across Iraqi airspace, then across Syria, then toward the Eastern Mediterranean corridor leading directly towards southern Turkey. Radar operators locked onto it almost immediately. In a region already filled with military activity, launches are not unheard of. But this trajectory was different because it was heading toward a NATO member state. And that meant something the alliance had never faced before under real combat conditions. Within minutes, missile defense systems activated. Somewhere in the Eastern Mediterranean, a NATO warship launched an interceptor. Two trajectories racing toward each other high above the region. Seconds later, the incoming missile was destroyed before it could reach Turkish airspace. Crisis avoided, at least on the surface. But what happened in those few minutes may have quietly crossed a historic line. Because for the first time in its history, NATO conducted a real combat interception of a ballistic missile fired toward a member state. And that raises the question military planners everywhere are now asking: was Incirlik the real target, or just the beginning of something much bigger? In waters near Sri Lanka, an American submarine encountered an Iranian naval vessel. What happened next marked the first time in more than 80 years that a United States submarine sank an enemy combatant ship with a torpedo in actual combat. The Iranian vessel, believed to be the frigate Iris Dina, one of the most advanced ships in Iran's regular navy, was struck and destroyed. Reports indicate that dozens of sailors were killed. Survivors were later rescued by Sri Lankan authorities. This single incident has already entered military history. The last time an American submarine achieved a torpedo kill against an enemy warship was during the final months of World War II. So within the span of a single day, several unprecedented events occurred almost simultaneously. NATO carried out its first real combat interception of a ballistic missile aimed toward a member state. An American submarine sank an Iranian warship in the Indian Ocean. Iranian drones targeted Western military infrastructure near Cyprus. And across diplomatic channels, new political developments inside Iran itself began to emerge. Reports suggest that Iran's leadership succession process may be shifting under pressure from powerful elements within the Revolutionary Guard. One name that has begun circulating in political circles is Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of Iran's current supreme leader. If confirmed, such a transition could fundamentally alter the strategic direction of the Iranian state at the very moment when tensions with the United States and its allies are reaching dangerous levels. Before we continue, If you want more deep geopolitical analysis like this, take a moment right now to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. It helps us continue bringing you detailed breakdowns of events that many headlines barely begin to explain. Because the deeper you examine these developments, the clearer it becomes that the world may be entering a new phase of strategic confrontation. European energy markets are already reacting to the instability, with gas prices spiking as governments quietly calculate worst-case scenarios for supply disruptions. Russia is watching the situation closely, aware that prolonged instability in the Middle East could reshape global energy flows and diplomatic alignments. Military planners across NATO are studying the implications of a missile trajectory that came dangerously close to one of the alliance's most sensitive installations. And Iranian strategists are undoubtedly analyzing the same data from their side, calculating what thresholds they may or may not have crossed. Because the critical question remains unanswered. Was the missile heading for Cyprus, or was it heading for Incirlik? If it was the first, then the event may remain a dangerous but contained incident. But if it was the second, then the world may have just witnessed the first attempted ballistic strike on a NATO nuclear weapons storage facility. And if that possibility is even partially true, then the next move in this confrontation could determine whether the conflict remains regional or expands into something far larger. So the question now, echoing through defense ministries, intelligence agencies, and war rooms around the world, is no longer simply what happened on that radar screen. The real question is, what happens next? Because one intercepted missile may be a warning, but history has shown that warnings sometimes arrive just before the real escalation begins. If you want to keep following this unfolding situation and understand the deeper forces shaping global conflicts, make sure you subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. And stay with us, because the next developments in this story may arrive far sooner than anyone expects. What makes this moment even more unsettling for military planners is not only the missile itself, but the chain of decisions that had to happen in seconds after it appeared on radar. When a ballistic missile is detected, every second matters. Early warning satellites pick up the heat signature of the launch. Radar stations calculate the trajectory. Command centers begin running predictive models to determine the potential target. Within moments, commanders must decide whether to intercept. In this case, the timeline was incredibly tight. A missile launched from western Iran toward the eastern Mediterranean can cross several countries in a matter of minutes. That means the window for reaction is extremely small, sometimes less than 10 minutes from launch to impact. Somewhere in that brief window, NATO officers had to decide whether the object moving across their screens represented a threat serious enough to engage. That decision has now entered history, because the moment the interceptor launched, NATO crossed a psychological threshold that had existed since the alliance was founded. For decades, NATO had prepared for the possibility of defending its members from ballistic missiles. The alliance had conducted exercises, simulations, and drills involving missile defense networks stretching from radar stations in Turkey to interceptor systems in the Mediterranean and Europe. But until now, those preparations had never been tested in an actual combat scenario involving a missile fired by a hostile state toward a NATO member. The interception, therefore, did more than destroy a single projectile in the sky. It revealed how the alliance might respond if future attacks occur. And that realization is now being studied carefully, not only inside NATO headquarters, but also in Tehran. Because once an adversary sees how a defense system reacts in real conditions, it begins calculating how to overcome it. Iran's missile doctrine has never relied on a single strike. For years, military analysts have warned that Iran's strategy focuses on saturation attacks. Instead of launching one missile, Iranian forces are capable of launching dozens, sometimes even hundreds in coordinated waves designed to overwhelm defensive systems. Even the most advanced interceptor networks have limits. Each interceptor costs millions of dollars. Each radar system can track only a certain number of objects simultaneously. When a large number of missiles arrive at once, the defense system must decide which threats to engage and which may slip through. That is the logic behind saturation tactics. And now, after watching NATO successfully intercept one missile, Iranian planners may be calculating whether the same defense could stop 10, or 20, or 50. This is why the geography of the interception matters so much. The Eastern Mediterranean has suddenly become one of the most heavily monitored pieces of airspace on the planet. American, British, Greek, and Turkish surveillance aircraft are now flying patrol patterns across the region. Naval vessels equipped with advanced radar systems are positioned strategically along shipping routes and near critical infrastructure. Satellite networks are scanning launch sites across Iran and neighboring regions, looking for signs that additional missiles could be prepared. Every radar sweep, every satellite pass, every intercepted communication is being analyzed. Because if another missile launch occurs, the response window may be even shorter than the first time. At the same time, events on the ground across the region are becoming more complicated. Military activity is increasing not only in the air and sea, but also across land corridors that connect several countries involved in the broader conflict. Intelligence reports suggest that new movements of armed groups and proxy forces are taking place along key routes in Syria and Iraq. These corridors have long been part of Iran's strategic network, linking its influence across the region. Weapons, equipment, and personnel move along these routes quietly, often under the radar of international attention. But in the context of rising tensions, every movement now carries new significance. Western analysts are trying to determine whether these shifts represent routine logistical operations or preparations for something larger. Meanwhile, inside European capitals, another conversation is unfolding behind closed doors. European governments understand that if the conflict continues to escalate, they may be drawn deeper into the crisis, whether they want to or not. Energy security is already becoming a central concern. The Middle East remains one of the world's most critical energy corridors, and any disruption in shipping lanes or production facilities could send shockwaves through global markets. Traders have already begun reacting to the uncertainty, pushing energy prices upward as they calculate the risk of prolonged instability. Governments are examining their strategic reserves, reviewing emergency supply plans, and quietly discussing how long they could sustain disruptions if the situation worsens. Russia, watching these developments carefully, is also calculating its own strategic opportunities. Moscow understands that energy shortages in Europe could shift diplomatic leverage in unexpected ways. If European countries begin searching urgently for alternative supplies, the geopolitical balance surrounding energy trade could change dramatically. That possibility adds another layer of complexity to an already volatile situation, because what began as a military confrontation in the Middle East could eventually reshape economic relationships across multiple continents. But the most unpredictable element may lie inside Iran itself. The question of leadership succession has been quietly looming over Iranian politics for years. Now, with military tensions rising and internal power structures under pressure, that question is becoming urgent. Reports circulating among diplomatic observers suggest that powerful factions within the Revolutionary Guard may be pushing for a leadership transition that keeps strategic control firmly within the security establishment. If Mujtaba Khamenei indeed emerges as the next supreme leader, the implications could be profound. Unlike some potential successors who were viewed as pragmatic or reform-minded figures, Mujtaba has spent much of his life connected to the intelligence and security apparatus of the state. That background suggests continuity rather than moderation in Iran's strategic outlook. And that possibility is precisely what concerns many analysts in Western capitals, because leadership transitions often create moments of uncertainty, and uncertainty can lead to unpredictable decisions. New leaders sometimes feel pressure to demonstrate strength, especially when the country is already engaged in external confrontation. That dynamic has appeared repeatedly throughout history. A leadership change combined with rising military tension can become a dangerous combination. There is another factor that rarely appears in headlines, but is being discussed quietly among strategic planners. Communication channels between rival powers are becoming more fragile. During earlier decades of geopolitical confrontation, there were often multiple diplomatic lines open, even during crises. Military hotlines, back-channel negotiations, and informal diplomatic contacts helped prevent misunderstandings from spiraling into direct conflict. Today, some of those channels still exist, but many have weakened due to years of political mistrust. That means the margin for miscalculation may be smaller than it once was. And this is why analysts keep returning to the same unsettling question. Was the intercepted missile truly an accident, a miscalculation in targeting coordinates, or a warning signal designed to test NATO's reaction? Because sometimes in geopolitics, a single event serves multiple purposes. A missile launch might be intended not only to strike a target, but also to observe how the opponent responds. Which radar systems activate first? Which ships launch interceptors? How long the decision process takes? Every response reveals valuable information. If that was the purpose behind the launch, then what happened above the Eastern Mediterranean may have been more than just a defensive success. It may also have been the first move in a much larger strategic game. And this is where the story becomes even more complicated, because every government involved is now trying to control the narrative while simultaneously preparing for possibilities they hope will never happen. Public statements emphasize restraint, stability, and diplomacy. But behind those statements, military planning continues at full speed. Warships reposition, aircraft patrol new routes, intelligence agencies collect new data, and each new piece of information raises further questions about what the next phase of this crisis might look like. If you find this analysis valuable and want more deep breakdowns of global events that mainstream headlines barely scratch the surface of, take a moment right now to subscribe to the channel, leave a like on this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe the missile was truly heading for Cyprus? Or do you think the real target was Incirlik and the nuclear weapons stored there? Because that single question may determine how historians interpret this moment years from now. And as we continue examining the evidence, new developments are already beginning to emerge that could push this crisis into an even more dangerous stage.